Hey, the time has finally come, guys. I posted on YouTube a video explaining that I finally got the components and the hardware required to be able to capture footage from my GameCube over to my computer, so therefore I could do Let's Plays, and I can also do some of the more classic game reviews on some older games that you guys probably remember from your childhood, as I do as well. So, I posted a ballot over on YouTube. You guys voted for it, so I'm going to start things off with a brand new string of videos called GameCube Classics, in which I go through a good chunk of my GameCube library and dig out some of the games that you guys probably remember from your childhood and I think are due for a classic review, just like I've been doing with some of the most recent movies that I've been doing classic reviews on, especially with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. And what many of you will probably know by now is that along with those movies came movie tie-in video games. So I'm going to start off my GameCube Classic series with the Spider-Man 2002 movie video game adaptation. I remember like it was yesterday that I was a wee little lad, and by wee I mean 11 years old, so I wasn't that wee. I was a little wee, but not too wee. And I went to Toys R Us, and I remember there being a PS2 kiosk with demos built inside of it, along with a disc that only had like one level of the 2002 Spider-Man video game. It was probably like the opening level where you go around New York trying to find Uncle Ben's killer. And I remember thinking of how revolutionary it was that there was a brand new Spider-Man game on a console, especially on a console when I was kind of in the know of the market. But at the time, it was the GameCube that really interested me the most out of all the consoles that were out at that point, between PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. GameCube was where it was at because I really wanted Smash. So when I found out that Spider-Man was still coming out on the GameCube as well, besides the PlayStation 2, I was like, yes, Mom, please, for Christmas, can I get it? And she would bullshit me for the longest time saying that she didn't have enough money. Back then, games cost about 40 to 50 bucks, no more than 50 bucks. And I know that with inflation, that's still considered a little bit expensive nowadays, but she had it. She had the money. I don't know what the fuck she was talking about. So she would kind of string these little fibs saying, oh, I'm going to put it on layaway and see if I can pay it off by Christmas, okay? And she ended up getting it for me anyway. So here we are about 15 to 16 years later. And now the question being asked is, does it still hold up? By now, when you think of a movie tie-in game, you think of something that's rather abysmal because it felt like it was just rushed to kind of meet the deadline. However, there was a slight renaissance of movie tie-in games that were not terribly bad. I mean, they were mediocre at worst, and that was during the early 2000s when Marvel was kind of getting into their own with various properties and various studios, from Universal with the Hulk, and then we had Spider-Man, and then we had a couple of others being strung along from various, and it wasn't even just Marvel, it was overall superhero games like Batman Begins and Superman Returns. However, back in 2001, a little unknown company by the name of Treyarch, yeah, the guys behind Call of Duty for every third year now is exchanging duties between Sledgehammer and Infinity Ward, Infinity Warfare. It's getting tiresome. Before they took on the juggernaut that was the Call of Duty franchise, they headed up Spider-Man for Activision back in 2001. And I think they had enough time on their plate to kind of cook up something that was a little bit much more innovative, because they are dealing with a character like Spider-Man who's very rooted into acrobatics and has a plethora of rogue gallery villains and characters to really pull lore from and put it into a video game. So they thought to themselves like, just like they decided to do with the movie, where the technology was cut up and it was advanced enough to be able to pull off some of those visual effects, maybe they could do a little bit of something with the video game adaptation. In order to prepare for this review, I did in fact play through the entirety of Spider-Man. And I remember it taking a way longer time to beat back when I was a kid. But that, again, back then, an hour to an hour and a half was an awful lot of time to be sitting down and playing video games. So now 26-year-old me, who averages about 3 to 3.5 hours at a time for video games, whether it be single-player open world experiences or even some multiplayer match after match type of experiences, 1.5 hours doesn't exactly seem so bad. So I managed to plow through Spider-Man in just under 4 hours. 4 hours! So considering that they were charging us a whole $49.99 for only a 4-hour experience, I will admit, looking back at it, I was like, that was a little bit of a criminal type of approach to a movie tie-in game, but this was during a time where movie tie-in games were coming into their own. It starts off with something pulled directly from the movie, which is that Peter has to track down Uncle Ben's killer. And that's exactly where it starts off. It skips over the bite, it skips over the introduction of Mary Jane and Harry Osborn and all that stuff. It jumps straight into the action of finding Uncle Ben's killer. And sounds pretty standard enough. I was like, okay, you know, for a video game, that's typically where you want to start off with a adaptation of a video game for the 2002 movie. So I'm like, alright, that makes sense. From that point forward, however, we get a inner monologue of Uncle Ben narrating over Peter's montage, coursing through this entire gap that could have been filled with an awful lot of character development for Mary Jane, for Harry Osborn, his father Norman Osborn, and their relationship, and their entire setup. But the game just says, fuck all that, let's jump into those colorful characters known as Shocker, Vulture, Scorpion. And it doesn't even set those up. They just go rambling around in the city, and it's up to you to stop them. Right before we finally get a proper origin story of Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin, and therefore it kind of jumps temporarily back into the narrative of the movie, before then it divulges again into some more video gamey stuff, like stuff that involves a giant robot and chemical weapons over at Oscorp, and then a little stealth mission trying to get out of Oscorp, finally ending in a climax on top of the New York bridge that's kind of resembling the ending fight of the Spider-Man movie. So I think it's safe to say that the story for this game is very loosely based on the movie, because it has very little to do with the actual movie, except for the few character beats that have to do with the Green Goblin and Uncle Ben's killer. And it doesn't exactly do much to really give you the same experience that the movie did. So if you were to have played this game prior to the movie, yes, it might spoil something, especially at the ending there, in terms of what holds in store for Harry Osborn and Norman Osborn's fate and how that ties in for future movies. But besides that, it really has not much more going for it in terms of its connection with the movies. It doesn't help to bring forward that cinematic experience anymore than to have the graphics and the sound bites and everything that was put into this game on a technological level to be very, very average, in fact at times mediocre, because it doesn't really do anything innovative with the way it's kind of presented. At the time, these graphics were passable, and to this day they still are. I never thought that they were terrible graphics. I mean, they're the most that they could have probably achieved with the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube at the time.
I can't let them get away, but if I don't stop those devices, the results
Exposition!
could be catastrophic.
The thing he did with his hands. Catastrophic. So having replayed the game recently, I look back at these graphics and I think to myself, yeah, they're not great. There's moments of rubbery, but I gotta be honest, that's not exactly that bad of a representation of Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, as well as Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn. The voice acting, on the other hand, for the most part, it's actually kind of bad. Tobey Maguire seems to be sleepwalking the majority of the time, and he just came into the booth for one day, recorded his lines, and just got the fuck out with his check.
I can't believe I'm relieved to only have to disarm one bomb. Carjacker killed an old man earlier today. The killer's a skull. Where is he? So what's your story? Stung by a radioactive scorpion or something?
And if it's not just him slurring through his lines, then you got some other secondary voice actors doing some really over-the-top stuff, especially that doctor who's helping out Norman Osborn in his science lab, or even some of the supporting villains that you encounter from time to time. They could be a little over-the-top at times.
Go back to your corporate masters.
His mouth wasn't moving.
No! No! No!
We hypothesize that he has augmented spider DNA in his system and feel certain that an analysis will enable us to complete.
God, you're boring. Sometimes it would be either bad or it would be really, really campy and over the top that it was delightful. It was in a very comic booky sort of way that it would remind me an awful lot of the comic book encounters that you would have between Spider-Man and the villains, or even some of the encounters you would find on the animated series from the 90s that had some very over-the-top acting of its own.
Shocker! You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
However, I have to give credit and testament over to just one particular actor who kind of improves upon what he was doing in the movie. here in the game and seems to be having an awful lot of fun doing so, and that's Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe is probably the only voice actor here who came in, and as Norman Osborn, he's kind of okay, but it's when he becomes the Green Goblin and he starts to do the Green Goblin voice where I'm like, yeah, I can tell. This guy is not only having an awful lot of fun getting back into the Green Goblin role because he loved it that much, but it's almost like he had ideas for lines of dialogue to do as the character in the movie, and they got rejected by Sam Raimi or by the screenwriter or whatever, and he took them and ported them over to what he could do here with the character in the video game, especially when you're doing certain battles with them and they randomly spit out lines of dialogue, and ever so often Green Goblin would say something that was very comedic and very funny and rather clever and cunning for a villain to be doing.
Today is an unexpected bonus, Spider-Man.
I've arranged for a little parting gift.
How can you be so naive? Now you're getting into the spirit of things. Tough day at the office, huh? Mine is a killer.
So I was like, huh, okay. Dafoe knows what's up. He knew what he was kind of getting himself into, and sure, he got a check, but he didn't exactly half-ass it as the character because you can tell he loves the character. And of course, I cannot forget the man, the myth, the legend himself, Bruce Campbell, making what otherwise would have been some tedious tutorials pure gold.
Combat skills a bit rusty? Dead-end job bringing you down? The old ball and chain yammering in your ear day and night? No, wait, that's me. Well, use this area to practice the techniques you've unlocked in the game so far. Try to beat as many enemies as possible. Duh. But watch your health. The fights will get progressively harder. And do me a favor. Try not to hurt yourself, huh?
Almost as much as this game loves its music. Jesus Christ, this is the most 2000s, early 2000s music I've ever heard in a video game or in a property ever. And it's annoyingly catchy too, like, it just earworms into your head. It's bad music, and yet, I just can't seem to get it out of my head.
It's right on the river. That's all I know.
Thanks.
Here we have the opening cinematic. Supremely stylized with the old early 2000s music. I don't know why they did it, but okay. But you don't come into a Spider-Man game for the story or for the voice acting. You come into a Spider-Man game to play as motherfucking Spider-Man. Now, the combat, for the most part, is pretty basic. You got a button that controls all the punching, you got a button that controls all the kicking, and then another button that controls all of the webbing powers, including yanking enemies towards yourself, being able to web yourself up into like a little ball and then explode, as well as being able to form web fists that kind of power up your punches. Along with that, you can also kind of string all these moves together to form some combos. However, that's kind of one of the first issues of the combat kind of comes in, is that, for one, the combos can't exactly be stringed with one another. It's like one set of combos can only be done that certain way. So you can't start off a combo and then jump into another one like you would probably expect Spider-Man to do. No, if the combo says BAB or XAX or something like that, you have to hit XAX to pull up the combo, and then that's it. You can't exactly start it off and then jump into another or jump out of the combo midway. It has to be started and it has to be finished. Along with that, the webbing runs out in this game, and it's strange when the mythology of this game is tied into the movie, and the movie clearly dictates that Spider-Man has organic fluid inside of his wrist, so he can't exactly run out. It doesn't make sense. And this is Spider-Man that we're talking about, of course, so eventually he's gonna have to swing and pull off some of these moves mid-air. And for the most part, it's fine. In fact, sometimes you'll get a little lucky and string together a combo or a kick or a move or a swinging kick that's pretty cool and takes out a variety of enemies all at once, but eventually it does kind of break the immersion knowing that this guy's swinging around when there's clearly no buildings to attach himself to. And that's, of course, that's one of the biggest criticisms that so many people have been able to kind of pay attention to over the years that this game has been out, is that the swinging is pretty basic and pretty, well, not really fun, because you just press one button, which is the right shoulder button, you start swinging, and then that's it. There's no variety to it, there's no momentum, you're just swinging around and just trying to find your window of opportunity to pull off moves. This style of swinging also didn't help the fact that whenever you did go from a very open environment, such as the skyline, which is where you were kind of restricted to, you were never able to go down to the street, otherwise Spider-Man would die. That did not make any sense. But what also made it frustrating was taking the style of acrobatics and web slinging and then putting it indoors. that made it for some frustrating controls. At least now, being much more of a finessed gamer, thinking about some of the most recent games that I've been playing, as well as almost every single other game that I've played since then on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, being that they had bigger graphical power, but on top of that, much more processing power to be able to kind of fine-tune what exactly you can do as a player and navigating a certain character within a certain environment. Going back through these GameCube controls, they were a little fidgety, and I can't exactly decipher whether or not it was because of my controller. It has aged and it has dust and rust inside of it, and maybe it hasn't been registering the moves properly, or maybe that's because this game just doesn't control well, and it's something that I just don't remember ever having a problem with when I was a kid, and it's heartbreaking to kind of discover now as an adult. Eventually, the game, however, tries to do a little bit of its own mission variety. If it's not found in the combat, it's found in the mission types, and it doesn't exactly master all of it. Ever so often you're going to encounter some puzzles that you have to do, or you have to do a certain objective under a certain amount of time. And then towards the ending of the game, you have a little mission that's all focused around stealth. And none of these things are actually executed that properly. They're kind of done half-assedly, where either the puzzles are just way too easy and don't exactly require an awful lot of thought, or the stealth is just a little fidgety to where I could have sworn I was hidden. I'm pretty certain that I'm in a shadowed area, and yet some motherfucker keeps finding me. Dumbass, come on! But fret not if the game does in fact become a little too frustrating for you during those moments where the game just doesn't know what to do with itself, then you can always cheat. Because that's one of my biggest guilty pleasures with this game kind of lies in, is that this is one of the few games I remember that had cheat codes kind of built within it. It has a section in the game where either after you beat the game or even prior to even playing the game, you can enter different cheat codes and either unlock certain stuff that otherwise you would have unlocked by beating the game under a certain difficulty or beating it under a certain requirement, or just input codes in because the developers put in some secret mode that you wouldn't have known otherwise, and therefore here you can play the game with giant ass heads, or you can play the game as Shocker, or better yet as Mary Jane in her kimono outfit. And these things are just an awful lot of fun. They're cheesy, they're over the top, they're ridiculous, and yet they're very, very fun to go back into the game and kind of replay the game. Even though the game has its fair share of side activities, one of the most memorable ones is towards the beginning. You encounter a woman that's just randomly on a rooftop, and you have to go and find her purse on another rooftop, and you're just like, Jackie Chan face, what?
Are you serious?
Huh.
Are you taking some kind of tour of city rooftops?
Yes.
Okay, whatever. I'll find
Yes?
the first for you.
Thank you.
She actually answered yes to that question? Let's make the cheesy and ridiculous moments of this game, such as that one, or one towards the end where two characters are kissing and one of them is wearing a fucking mask.
Oh, yeah. Thanks again.
No problem. Grab hold of a rogue balloon anytime. Rescuing damsels is my specialty.
Go get him, Tiger.
Spider-Man's the worst! Let's take those moments and just run with them by adding these cheat codes with big ass heads, small little bodies, playing as Mary Jane, or best yet, in my opinion, the best cheat code of them all, playing as the Green Goblin. I think this is actually one of the most interesting things that I've seen in a movie tie-in game that kind of changes the dynamic, because it's not just a skin that lets you play as the Green Goblin, but you're still Spider-Man swinging around and beating up enemies. You're actually playing as the Green Goblin. You get full functionality of his utilities, of his weapons, and most especially his glider. And they even go as far to try to infuse a little bit of a story into this, where if you replay the game as the Green Goblin, they actually put some context into why the Green Goblin is now going around doing the things that Spider-Man was doing.
I can't believe I'm doing this. Using Dad's goblin gear is just nuts. That weird invoice I found with Dad's stuff sure made it look like he was hiring the Skulls gang to do dirty work for him. I have to know what he was doing.
Sure, that came at a cost of cutting out some of the cutscenes that are very Spidey-centric, because they kind of have to, otherwise it wouldn't have made sense. But they at least got a voice actor to do lines as Harry Osborn, and again adding some context as to why he's going around with his dad's uniform and utilities and weapons, and going around and beating up all these bad guys that Spider-Man already did. However, there's only a statute of limitation to that, and eventually he's going to start saying the same exact dialogue that Spider-Man had, so the fun kind of runs out at a certain point. And it's in those secret unlockables and cheat codes and even some of the little videos and galleries that you get to unlock on the side is where the replay value for this game lies, especially since it is such a short game where you can kind of beat it in probably just a day, which I really do not remember feeling back when I was a kid. I remember this game taking way longer than that, and here I am beating it in less than a day. And also thinking about all the different areas of this game that just did not improve over time. It really did not. There's also a bunch of tutorials and training sessions that you could do, but out of all of them, the most fun would have to be Pinhead Bowling. It's bowling with Spider-Man and some goons. And you get to play with your friends. What could be better than that? But it's still a part of my childhood and still has things about it that it doesn't make me exactly think to myself, why did I like that? Why did I like that back in 2002? I still don't hold any kind of remorse towards that. So if 26-year-old David were to go back in time, replay the game, and do a review for a big company website like GameSpot or IGN, I were to have given the Spider-Man 2002 movie game a very, 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 very low 7 out of 10. I was contemplating giving it 6 out of 10, but I genuinely had some very fun times thinking about some of those cheesy moments that weren't exactly the most sentimental moments that I remember them being when I was a kid, as well as some of those secret unlockables and cheat codes that just took me back so much, and took me back to a much more simpler time with video games that, you know, I don't think I'll be able to get back again. And that wraps up my first GameCube Classics review on the original Spider-Man. Now that we got it out of the way, I guess only one thing is left to do, and that is to jump into what many regard as the best movie tie-in game there is, and arguably one of the best Spider-Man games surprisingly created, Spider-Man 2. So, please let me know in the comments below what you guys thought of my review for the original movie tie-in game from 2002's Spider-Man, as well as what you would like to see in the future for GameCube Classics. Like I said, I do manage to have Spider-Man 2 on the GameCube as well as various other games. Please post them in the comments below. And also, I want to ask you guys, I did record some Let's Play footage with commentary on this Spider-Man game that you just saw me review, so if you guys want to see that kind of split up into different parts, please let me know in the comments, and I will hopefully post it within the preceding weeks. Until then, however, you can show your support for the video by hitting the like and share button down below, and of course subscribe to see those Let's Plays if they do go up, as well as future GameCube Classic reviews such as this one. Until next time guys, see you all later. It kind of tries to do what certain other asymmetrical multiplayer games do, where one character is this big powerful thing and then the other characters are just regular humans trying to take it down, a la Friday the 13th right now. Evolve, however, wasn't as pristine and polished as, well, neither is Friday the 13th.